Well, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. This is a panel that's ambitiously titled Cybersecurity, full stop. And the goal of the panel, I think, at some level, is to define what that means. What do we mean when we say cybersecurity? Who has the responsibility for cybersecurity? We've talked a lot today and yesterday, and we'll talk a lot again tomorrow about what governments are doing, individually and collectively, at a regional level and internationally as well, to improve the posture of cybersecurity for their citizens. The aims of this panel are threefold. We'll evaluate the major challenges and current threats that exist in cyberspace today. Now, I don't know about you, but nearly every conversation about cybersecurity that I've had over the past 5 years has been nearly consumed with a discussion of threats. But I'm confident that this panel can move beyond threats and talk about what we do about these threats we face. The second thing, and this is related to that the panel will do is try and tease out practical steps for prevention and for response. What is it we do in the face of a dynamically exploding internet, a growing cyber awakening worldwide, a persistent set of threat and threat actors, whether they be criminal or otherwise? What are the practical measures that users and enterprises and governments can do? What can we do to prevent bad things from happening? Minister Bishop this morning, or earlier this afternoon, I should say, mentioned 4 things, the top 4 critical controls that we should all be doing right now. And we can be doing them at low or no cost to prevent upwards of 85% of the threats from reaching our systems and our users. Why aren't we doing them? Let's talk about that. And the third thing that we'll talk about on this panel is how to improve cross-border cooperation and how to prioritize cybersecurity at all levels. And cross-border cooperation means not only between and among governments, but between and among private sector entities, industry, and even community of users themselves. I'm delighted to be joined on this stage by a panel of experts who span the globe and whose expertise really needs no introduction. I refer you to the website for the materials that go into their backgrounds in depth. I will introduce them as they speak. And one of the conventions of this panel will be to be slightly unconventional. And while our first speaker is listed as Laszlo Deák from Hungary, we'll actually begin with Neil Kloppenstein, who is the Executive Secretary of the Organization of American States. Neil, you have the floor.
Ministers, delegates, ladies and gentlemen. First, let me offer many thanks to the Republic of Korea for hosting this important conference. And I want to start right off saying it's a pleasure for me to represent the Organization of American States and its 34 member countries to share with you the work we are doing to build cybersecurity capacities in Latin America and across the Caribbean. My agenda is briefly to talk about our regional security framework and the strategies we are using to build cybersecurity capacities in the Americas, which includes promoting national CSIRTs and national strategies, sharing training, and promoting best practices. In the Americas, we have approached cybersecurity as a regional issue and have acted regionally to build cybersecurity capacities in our member states. We have done this through, first of all, establishing in 2004 a declaration or a resolution to promote cybersecurity across the Organization of American States. This was adopted by all of our member states unanimously, and it was the first regional cybersecurity convention in the world. The 2004 strategy directed REMJA, which is our legal branch, to develop cybercrime legislation across the Americas, CTEL, our telecommunications branch, to deal with technical standards and regulation, and CICTE, our counterterrorism and anti-crime branch, to assist states in developing CSIRTs and a comprehensive cyber policy. Each of these three groups work together to improve cyber capacity in member states. In 2012, our member states redoubled their efforts and adopted a new declaration on strengthening cybersecurity in the Americas. This declaration, reacting to the ever-changing cyber environment, calls for efforts to engage all stakeholders. It calls to revamp cyber policy efforts and to continue building technical incident response capabilities. So what have we done? We started out early creating a culture of cybersecurity. At the time, in early 2003, cybersecurity awareness was very much varied across the Americas, from not really an issue to somewhat important. We were able to build awareness, and so we were then able to move into the promotion of best practices. And from there, the development of national CSIRTs, moving on to national cybersecurity strategy, building competence and communication through cybersecurity management exercises, and increasingly bringing in all actors, not just government actors, but private sector and civil sector engagement. And now we're moving on and starting for the first time this year, industrial control system security and critical infrastructure protection programming, starting with Columbia later this year. The establishment of CSIRTs is really a success story for us. In 2006, when we first began working to develop additional CSIRTs in the Americas, we had 5 CSIRTs up and running in the Americas. But today, there are many more. We have almost 17, and in some countries, 2 or 3 areas or organizations dealing with cybersecurity. So this has been a real success story for us. Then building on, next we then promoted the development of national strategies. In our work, we wanted to make sure that all relevant actors are involved in this process: the government, private sector, civil society, academia, and relevant key players. Many countries in the world are beginning to draft these strategies, and many of our OAS governments have sent requests to CICTE for assistance, like we provided in the 3 countries above: Colombia, Panama, and Trinidad and Tobago. Finally, we seek to build capacities and share best practices, and in particular, develop networks across borders and between countries. We do this by convening regional and sub-regional fora where officials discuss successes, difficulties, and emerging threats and trends. Through these meetings, we have created a hemispheric network of CSIRT personnel which connects technicians should they need a quick and reliable contact in a neighboring country. This has facilitated efficiency in building capacity and has also strengthened bonds and built networks between incident responders. Our latest initiative is a mobile lab. We built a cybersecurity mobile lab, and we use this to conduct crisis management exercises, basically simulating cyber attacks. We do this to test communication, procedure, and policies related to an incident response, and we bring in all of the actors, private sector, CSIRTs, academic, press, all aspects when we are conducting these simulation exercises. This is because we realize that dealing with an incident of this type is not just a government responsibility, but involves many sectors. Although we do focus on building and developing technical capacities, these exercises have proved most important in identifying communication weaknesses between primary actors. What has been invaluable is that new procedures and protocols in dealing with an incident response are developed from this. So although we have found in the Americas that technical capabilities are pretty good, the communication among key actors is not so good. And that's, I think, the real benefit of this exercise. And so I'm going to conclude by just saying our work is supported by Canada, the United States, and all of our member states. We collaborate with many international and regional partners, such as the various United Nations organizations, other regional partners like IDB, OECD, and APEC, as well as nonprofit corporations like the World Economic Forum, as well as the private sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Let me encourage the audience to be thinking as you're listening to these presentations, because we're going to turn to you and involve you in this conversation after we've heard from each of our speakers. Neil, and one of the things I'd like you to think about when questions come around your end, you focused on the progress that the region has made, largely by looking at the progress that the governments have made in the region. And again, we've heard a lot about what governments are doing. But there are two other communities, at least, that may not have been making as much progress. The business community, and not just the technical community in IT or in cybersecurity, but the business community that sells us things and sells us services and is at the heart of the economies that run in all of our countries. How far would you say they have come over these same 10 years in understanding and taking action in cybersecurity? And then there's the rest of us. Where are we relative? If our governments are way ahead of us in understanding and appreciating cyber dangers and acting on that appreciation, what about the public at large? So those three communities, I'd like you to address that. Our next speaker is Yuri Ito, who is the chair of AppCert and the director of Japan CERT, and she will speak to us now. Yuri, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello. My name is Yuri Ito, and I plan to make my remarks based on my perspectives from the cybersecurity operational community. Today, I am specifically representing CERT Collaboration Forum in Asia Pacific, known as AP CERT. I will share how we overcome the challenges and have kept us working closely together to make the internet cleaner, safer, and reliable space through managing the regional level of cyber risks. And just to clarify before I start my presentation, when I say making the cyberspace more cleaner and healthier space, I am not talking about content. I am talking about internet's technical ecosystem, which consists of internet infrastructure, such as interconnected servers and devices. We're trying to make them cleaner and healthier. So with that, it's been 10 years since AP CERT was established. We have 26 teams with 19 economies today working together closely with the trust. But building trust is not easy. There are significant differences in political system, IT infrastructure, culture, and language difference. Each team also have different authorities, and their remediation approaches in dealing with incident can be very different. But I feel we've generally successfully overcome those differences and work well together as one big team. And I will highlight a couple of key points that have enabled us to achieve that success, which is having a common goals and risk reduction approach. And I'd like to initially touch upon the evolution of the CERT community and how we work internationally. So in 90s to early 2000, CERTs were established mostly in places with deep technical expertise, such as governmental research centers and in universities. And CERTs have developed its collaboration forum very organically. And in 2000, the very first regional level of CERT forum was established in Europe. And 3 years later, in 2003, AP CERT was established. Globally, other regional initiatives are gaining momentum today, such as Organization of Islamic Cooperation (CERT) and Africa CERT. Over the past 20 years, the evolution of global internet services, cyber threat and risk evolved as well. Cybersecurity has become a major public safety and a national security issue. So governments have become much more engaged in cybersecurity operations. National CERTs have been supplemented and even supplanted by national security lead operations organizations. Now today, with both the technology and threat continues to rapidly evolve, we see targeted attacks are occurring globally, and we see increasing number of clearly national security motivated attacks such as Stuxnet and DDoS against governments and banking systems. Governments are start discussing on cyber warfare and cyber conflict in a places such as this meeting. And around the world, governments are making accusations and taking sides on who is conducting attacks and creating risks. So managing cyberspace and cybersecurity is quickly being seen as competition. And this competitive approach has started to create substantial challenges for CERTs and technical community in pursuit of international collaboration. The involvement of national security organizations can potentially break down in trust in CERT and technical community if we were seen as an instrument of the state-focused competition. And as a result, it can become very hard to share information and collaborate in remediation of threats such as botnet or politically motivated hacking. The result may be a significant raise of the cyber risk level because of the lack of transparency and then the collaboration of the technical and operational level. Involvement of the commercial organizations that operate most of the cyberspace today becoming ever more important for the real time because they are the players that can do the instant response in real time and information sharing in a very agile manner. National security competition has also made it more difficult for these organizations to collaborate globally. AP CERT has turned this challenge to an opportunity. AP CERT members work on addressing cybersecurity concerns through many programs, including cybersecurity exercise, cleanup programs, awareness raising campaign, partnership, developing and training support, and share network monitoring system and data sharing called SBAME. We provide trust point of contact hotline between the members. And while we do not think that we can stop the state's focused competition, but we can provide a stable trust point of contact as a part of the confidence building measures. So AP CERT has established as its main primary goal on contributing to making the internet ecosystem cleaner and healthier as a basis for improved cybersecurity in Asia Pacific, as a mutual benefit for all the parties using cyberspace in the long term. And we are focused on cleaning up malware and collaborate on removing botnets. Going further, we are trying to measure the prevalence of malware and the success of remediation approaches as the basis of sharing best practice and providing transparency globally as to the sources security risks. So having focus on this vision of focusing on measurement and enabling the remediation, we have quickly learned that we can learn a lot from how the public health organizations work together internationally to respond to the global level of risks to the health and then underlining the environmental conditions. And one of the important approach we can learn is how they gather data and use the layers of metrics to drive the policy and international collaboration. One of the things we're missing in pursuing global security goals is a strong source of data, cross-comparable and robust enough to develop the statistics to measure the cybersecurity risks nationally and globally. Such metrics and risk measurement is essential for policymakers to evaluate the potential cybersecurity approaches. And also, it's very useful for the operational community to prioritize the challenges and also manage the limited resources. But most significantly, the metrics can serve as a common language between policy and technical community. I often play a liaison role between technical and policy community, and I worry there are big gaps in how two communities view cybersecurity challenges differently, and we speak different language. So metrics can be a great tool to create an agreement around the sources of risk and how to invest in lowering those risks. And the good news is OECD and a CSIRT community had started to look at the challenge and initiated the efforts to create such metrics and measurement approaches. So we're very excited. AP-CERT has turned this is my conclusion. The AP-CERT has turned its focus from security to risk reduction approach, the regional risk reduction, and viewing the cybersecurity challenges as a part of improving the global environment. And with this way, we believe we can identify the common goals for mutual benefit in the long term. And I believe such a focus on a healthier, cleaner cyberspace will prove the crucial underlying success factor in achieving the global cybersecurity collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuri. So Yuri has put a number of issues on the table that have reinforced some things Neil has said, and these has been two examples of regional organizations or regional approaches to improving cybersecurity. But Yuri, one of the things I'd like you to think about is, are all of these efforts, again, at the national level or at the international level on a regional basis, in effect, a waste of time? Because people aren't implementing the critical controls that they can implement right now, to reduce their threat vulnerability by 85%. Again, to quote Minister Bishop from earlier today, they can do it right now at low or no cost. They are broadly not doing it, yet governments at a regional level, and again bilaterally and individually, are making all of this progress with the development of certs, with the raising of awareness, with the identification of risk, and with efforts to bridge the gap between the technical and the non-technical community, as you've discussed. But isn't all of that, in effect, a waste of time unless and until enterprises and users and organizations get smarter about the protections that they should be doing themselves right now? I just ask you to think about that. And a person who will be able to speak to that immediately as we segue now to our private sector portion of this panel is Sherry Maguire, who is Vice President for Global and Government Affairs and Cybersecurity Policy at Symantec, one of the world's leading providers of cybersecurity solutions. Sherry, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Jane. And it's great to be here today, and I especially want to congratulate the Korean government for what has been just a really marvelous conference so far. I will also apologize for my voice. I don't usually sound this way, but I think too many airplanes have taken their toll. Today I'm going to talk to you about cybersecurity and the roles of industry, governments, and PPPs, or public-private partnerships. And specifically, I'm going to talk about a paper that industry released yesterday called Moving Forward Together, Recommended Industry and Government Approaches for the Continued Growth and Security of Cyberspace. This is really an unprecedented paper that we released as part of the conference with the Business Software Alliance, Digital Europe, the Information Technology Industry Council, the Japan Electronics and Information Technology Industries Association, and the Korea Internet Corporations Association, that looks at the specific roles and responsibilities that both industry and government share in securing cyberspace. In addition, we had at our launch event yesterday the governments of the United States, the United Kingdom, Korea, and Hungary, all there to speak on behalf of governments and their appreciation for this paper that we've put forward. So I would encourage those of you who haven't read it to download it. There'll be a website at the end that you can go to access it. But it's a very short paper, but it gives a good overview, I think, of the responses for collaboration and coordination for both industry and government. There we go. All right. Go back one. Here we go. Okay. So in particular, the paper covers the contributions to the growth and the benefits of cyberspace that both industry and government make. In particular, it covers economic expansion and development, and this is the growth that's really linked to the digital economy and how it's contingent on the policies that enable governments, businesses, and the public to access and adopt technologies and services. It also focuses on social and cultural benefits of cyberspace, providing children, for example, in developing countries with access to educational tools or access to the information technology services to establish micro-businesses. On the cybersecurity front, which is what this panel is about, the benefits, of course, are far-reaching. And those risks, however, must be managed. And I'm going to talk about that more later. The paper also covers international security. These are the risks and the benefits from cyberspace that are shared across the global user community, and that cooperation among global players is truly paramount. The fifth area, of course, is cybercrime, and that the innovation in criminal activity that we're seeing today and the distributed nature of bad actors can really make their enforcement quite challenging for governments around the globe. And the sixth area, of course, is capacity building, which is a major focus of not only the conference here, but of all of the pre-workshops that were held around the world, and focusing on the legal, technical, and policy aspects and the numerous examples that are in place. And as you can imagine, those 6 areas, of course, are the 6 areas that are covered at the conference, so we have good linkage there. So there really is, I don't think I need to tell all of you, an imperative for cybersecurity collaboration across industry and government. Usually when I give these kinds of talks, I start out with 2 or 3 slides about the threat environment. And as Jane indicated in her opening remarks, I don't think I really needed to do that for this audience at all. We're all here for the same reason. But this imperative for collaboration amongst industry and government, I am not sure if it is recognized by all that are in the room. So I thought it was important to talk about the aspects of the global ICT infrastructure and how it is mostly owned and operated by private industry. In addition, private sector develops the majority of the technologies that comprise and secure that infrastructure. And just to give you a sense of the scale, the ICT sector contributes more than $2.8 trillion in US dollars in global output from IT industries. And that was a 2010 figure. I would venture to say it's quite higher today. The sector also contributes 6% of the global GDP, as well as 20% of total employment in OECD countries are connected to jobs in the ICT sector. So the economic perspective, when you think about cybersecurity to the global economy, is quite significant. In addition, the cybercrime challenge, of course, is not something that we can solve by any single company or government, thus the need for significant collaboration. And that cooperative approach will actually enable our collective defense and security. So just to continue with this, and I'll run through this quickly, this notion of public-private partnership. Cybersecurity really is a shared responsibility, and this is something I think sometimes gets thrown around as a platitude. but it does really hold true that everyone, from governments to businesses to citizens, has to play their part in securing our systems. Public, private, and civil society also all need to be informed of the security threat environment and the things that they can do to protect themselves by one another. This also applies to policy, technology, and operations, as well as infrastructure and robust policy mechanisms. So let me talk briefly now about cybersecurity roles, the risk reduction and resiliency component that my colleague Yuri spoke about a moment ago. As we talk about in the paper, industry plays several significant roles. One is that we, as I mentioned, build and maintain the security of technologies and services. We also need to coordinate on incident response and vulnerability management. We need to actively participate in public-private partnerships and also to play our role in raising awareness and education. On the other hand, in order for us to be effective, we also need for governments to do their role in developing and implementing policies and strategies that include industry and civil society in the deliberations, to encourage adoption of globally recognized and industry-led consensus standards and best practices, as well as to promote market-driven technology innovation and leverage existing cooperative incident response forums, again, leveraging those public-private partnerships. And lastly, to raise awareness and education about basic cyber hygiene for all citizens. So there's a number of examples, and I won't go into extensive detail, but there's significant examples today about different frameworks for public-private collaboration. These include policies and national strategies, standards, best practices and guidelines, cyber exercises, information sharing and incident response, child online safety, education and awareness. And there are numerous models, as I said, in use today, and I mentioned just a few countries here, but there's an et cetera there because there are too many to list. But these take many shapes and forms. There are voluntary, regulatory, ad hoc, and bilateral. They also take the forms of different types of partnerships, from business to business, government to government, government to business, and business to government. But at the root of all of this must be a foundation of mutual trust and respect, that we all play our own role and that we have to share that responsibility. Now, many of these could be viewed as tactical means to achieve the policy and operational frameworks, but when you take them all together collectively, they really do comprise a rich field to learn from the study of existing public-private partnerships, both the successes and, frankly, the failures. And there are some of those, too. So I did want to just close out by giving a quick couple of examples of what our company is doing here in Korea, working with government, because I think it's helpful to give some specific examples. But most of the work that we're doing is on information sharing, malware analysis, and on education, training, and skill building to help build that next cadre of cybersecurity professionals with the Korea Internet and Security Agency, the Korea University Graduate School of Information Security, the Korea Information Technology Research Institute, as well as the Cyber Terror Response Center of the Korea National Police Agency, which I was pleased that we were able to sign an MOU with them yesterday to share more information and help on malware analysis to provide our global perspective. So just a few final points to close it out. Again, I don't think I need to say it, but I will anyways, that cybercrime and cyber attacks are increasingly sophisticated and damaging. Private sector plays an integral role in securing our cyber assets. And there are many frameworks for collaboration. There's no single best way, no silver bullet, but there are many examples that can be learned from. And in order to be effective to manage risk and ensure resiliency, we really must use that comprehensive approach across the public and private partnerships to effectively counter threat, manage risk, protect infrastructure, and ensure resiliency. And as I promised, there's a couple of websites at the end. If you'd like to download the paper that I talked about during the presentation, you can go to www.iti.org or to www.bsa.org, and you can pull it down yourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sherry. I think your presentation makes clear that while industry, and certainly Symantec as an example, is doing everything it can, not only to raise awareness, but to make the point that no single organization could do all that needs doing. I think also you've seen some consensus nods at this panel as we've talked about what governments are doing, what regional organizations and approaches are doing, what the private sector is doing. There's still an awful lot that individual enterprises and users can do on their own behalf. And so at a minimum, I think we'd like to see this conference come away with a strong endorsement of what are those basic high priority things that reduce our vulnerability by in excess of 80%. And we all agree there are no silver bullets. But Sherry, what I would like to ask you to think about as we go around, and we have 3 more speakers before we get to the audience, is who's going to make a difference in making us feel secure? Will the public and enterprises feel secure if there is a Symantec or a Huawei or some other company that has that secret sauce, that magic formula, that silver bullet? Or will we all feel more secure if governments are the ones stepping in to handle the cybersecurity? It's interesting. None of us would get into an automobile, or more importantly, would put our children into an automobile that did not have seatbelts. Yet we allow our children online, and we get online every day without doing the basic proven techniques that keep us safe. So who's going to make the difference? Who's going to change the public mindset to take those 4 steps to begin to make us safer than we are today? And let me, in that case, turn to another representative of industry, John Suffolk, who's a senior vice president of Huawei, also a prominent player on the stage of cybersecurity. John?
Thank you very much, Jane. Good afternoon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me thank our host, the Republic of Korea, for hosting this event and their kindness and generosity of spirit. I'd also like to thank Jane, our moderator, and our panelists for what I hope will be a very lively and informative set of questions, so please get your questions sent in. In the interests of time, because I know this is at the end of the day, I'm not going to talk a great deal about how Huawei is building cybersecurity into its complete end-to-end set of processes, or how we're trying to secure components from over 1,000 suppliers around the world, or the challenges of training 150,000 people in 140 countries speaking 155 languages. That will all be published in a white paper where we publish our end-to-end processes tomorrow. The reality is, if cybersecurity was easy, we wouldn't be having this conference. We're having this conference because, as Jane has said, there is no magic bullet. There is no perfect answer or perfect set of standard. And I think we need to be realistic. Cybersecurity as an issue is too broad a topic to have a single solution. There are too many devices being connected to the internet of variable capability. There are too many vulnerabilities in hardware and software that we're producing every second of every day. The sheer rate of change of technology is too great to control it at any one moment in time. And the reality is, bad actors only need to be successful once to break into our technology, where we as defenders have to be successful every single time to keep them out. You know, because we're based here in this conference, we live in a very globally connected world. And it's a world that faces globally connected issues every single day from all parts of the world. And this is not restricted by any territorial boundary or law or regulation. And these challenges, as you know, address all hardware, all software, all service providers from all countries. But that's today. As we look forward to 5th generation technology that will be with us from a telecommunications not many years away in 2020, that technology will deliver speeds 100 times faster than today's fastest wireless connections. That will help companies set up their operations in any part of the world to values that suit the values of the company, to laws that suit the laws of that company, and even the tax regime that suits the tax requirements of that company, and tax being something very topical for many governments at this moment in time. So if we think our challenge is difficult today, just think what that challenge will be when that is moving on by 2020 or around 2020. This will challenge every government and every enterprise in this room. It was Francis Bacon, the English philosopher and scientist, who said, "He that will not apply new remedies must expect new evils, for innovation is the greatest development from time." 2013 will go down as a year where the sharp reality of the way that we have digitized every part of our life and business came to the fore. We've now obtained a much better level of understanding about what happens to our data and the need to protect that data in various scenarios. But the reality is, as a product vendor, building in cybersecurity to protect our customer data and personal data goes hand in hand from a vendor perspective. But the protection of personal data from a national security perspective takes on a different kind of dimension. And I think we all have to work together to work out what is the right balance which enables all stakeholders to deliver their individual objectives, even when some of those objectives might appear to conflict at face value. But you know, having international laws, standards, templates, guidance is not much use if the base technology that we are using is not very safe and secure, because little investment has been made to make it safe and secure. And I think it's fair to say, given this is our third conference, the time is right to up the ante on our performance, accelerate our pace of change, and accelerate our ability to actually make change and improve security. Whilst in the past we've looked at this as very much as a local or a regional issue, it actually hasn't delivered a great deal of global delivery. And I have to ask ourselves, after 3 years, do you in the audience, do we think we have made enough progress given the challenges that we're trying to deal with today and the challenges that we need to face in the future? So the reality is we all need to be more demanding. Governments need to be more demanding. Enterprises need to be more demanding. Can you imagine the scenario if the 90 or so countries in this room said to their technology vendors, here's what we believe good looks like from security. If you want to win our business, you must conform to this. If you don't get our business. Governments tend to spend 20% of all technology spend in their own countries. That would cause a fundamental seismic shift in terms of vendors' focus of security as a fundamental requirement of winning business. And the reality is, as in every walk of life, you've got to follow the money if you want to make progress. But vendors need to demand more on what good looks like, demand more on what the international laws or even local laws look like, demand more in terms of, what is the right standard that I should be operating in. But they also need to be more open and transparent. The reality is, when you look at end-to-end cybersecurity, it is such a broad environment, it is almost impossible to find experts from cybersecurity HR law, cybersecurity international law, cybersecurity supply chain, cybersecurity manufacturing, cybersecurity software engineering and verification. By being more transparent as vendors, we can also help the community learn and take on board more of the challenges. Shareholders need to demand more. What is the right balance that my company, where I have made my investment, has taken to invest and protect against the assets the company own? If the company is not investing in their protection, then we should not be surprised if those assets, for whatever reason, are tampered or damaged or stolen in some shape or form. And as Jane has said, we don't lack knowledge. 4 things stop up to 80. We're not lacking best practice. Do the top 4, do the top 10, do the top 20, do the top 35. What we lack is commitment and motivation to make it happen. Ladies and gentlemen, let me just finish with a few words. Digital technologies has fundamentally shaped mankind for the good. Better health, better education, better economic outcome. And whatever cyber criminals are taking away, the value technology brings is significantly greater than what we lost. But the reality is, in times of economic turbulence, in times of political turbulence, or just sheer competition, we should understand that the threats will never go away, and nor should we in our endeavor to collectively work together to solve this issue. And finally, I sit before you as a proud representative of Huawei, and we dedicate ourselves as a company who operates in over 140 countries, dealing with 3 billion citizens around the world, to work with all parties, all stakeholders, to fundamentally drive up the quality of our technology and the ecosystem that runs much of the world today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. You've made 2 points I want to follow up on. One is that you've talked about how more complicated things are becoming, and how more complex and difficult and fast-moving things are. But on the same token, you did say that there are things that we can do. There are the top 4 of the 20 critical controls. If it's the top 10 or the top 5, they're still the top 4. They're the same, basically. Whitelisting your software, limiting administrative permissions, real-time patching of your system and your applications. Why aren't we doing these simple things to address 80% of the problems we're facing? And how can industry lend its voice to that message, even and as you're selling products that do many of those things? So associating explicitly with them. We're going to shift now away from industry representatives and move back toward government, slowly but surely. Our next speaker is Ki-Ju Lee, well known to this audience, certainly. And let me take the occasion of presenting him to you as speaker to thank our Korean hosts for an enormously successful conference, well organized, professionally put on with a great deal of humanity and charm as well. Ki-Ju is the president of KISA, the Korean Internet and Security Agency. Ki-Ju, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. My presentation will focus on a Korean case, and I will talk about what we are doing for cybersecurity in Korea and our efforts to promote international cooperation. First, let me address KISA's current state of operation. We are leading the way in promoting cybersecurity efforts in private sector by building up a variety of internet incident response systems. Our efforts also range from personal information protection, response to spam email, internet usage promotion, and to internet ethics. Let me move on to status of cyber attacks in Korea. Although Korea is recognized as a key player in the ICT sector, we are not immune to cyber attacks. As you well know, Korea was hit by massive cyber attacks in last March and June, respectively. That cyber attacks was targeting websites of private financial institutions, broadcasting companies, and major government agencies. On top of this, the number of cyber financial frauds, such as phishing and farming and smishing, are also trending upward. The worrying trend requires an even more important role of KISA, and we are doubling our efforts to prepare effective response measures. Now, how we respond to these kinds of cyber attacks. KISA is devoted to put in place pre- and post-analysis system to improve our response to cybersecurity incidents. To this end, we installed new division recently to comprehensively analyze internet incidents. And another areas we are currently working on include establishing comprehensive analysis and sharing system between private sector and public sectors. And we are also building cooperation channels with global security companies like Symantec, reinforcing response to soaring incidents of electronic financial fraud. Last but not least, I would like to elaborate on KISA's effort to promote international cooperation. As a matter of fact, the international cooperation is what brought us all to the Seoul conference. In an effort to bring cooperation to a high level, we are working along with plenty of global security enterprises, not to mention our neighboring countries, such as China, Japan, US, United Kingdom. What's more, we are sharing our hands-on experience with numerous developing countries. A case in point is the K-Link program. This invites developing countries' public officials for training of ICT. Subject of the program include ICT policy, radio management, digital convergence, and cybersecurity. Recently, we are increasing the courses targeting cybersecurity. Well, I would like to take another example. Global Cybersecurity Center, or GCC, is another good example, I think. We are closely consulting with the World Bank to establish GCC. In the morning session, plenary session, Minister Chen Mung-ki also mentioned GCC. Well, this project is going smoothly under the consulted efforts by the Korean government and the World Bank. Once it will be open, I expect we can greatly help many other countries and organizations in need of tightening cybersecurity. We are planning to provide our hands-on experience and knowledge and consulting and any other kinds of technical assistance in the area of cybersecurity and so on. Well, this can be a proposal I would like to say. Cybersecurity does not discriminate national boundaries or regions and is emerging as a critical issue that needs our attention. Especially, there is an increasing need for protecting critical information infrastructure, or CII. This provides essential services to our lives. If CII is destroyed, it can have enormously serious impact. So I think it is imperative to raise awareness of CII protection and come up with specific countermeasures. In last March, NATO published Tallinn Manual, which is a study on how international law applies to cyber conflicts and cyber warfare. And Geneva Convention of 1949 defines the rights and protections for non-combatants. As with these, it is necessary to designate CIIs as a basic human rights preserving facilities. We should, I think, protect them all through internationally coordinated collaboration. Well, as a country that experienced numerous cybersecurity threats and successfully fought them off, Korea is willing to share our practical knowledges and skills, even our trial and errors in the past, with any nation or any organization. In particular, our organization has been at the heart of the cybersecurity efforts based on profound experience in cybersecurity, personal information protection, and response to spam email. So now, let me close by saying that we are ready to work with any organization to create safer and more secure cyberspace. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiju. As we turn to our last speaker, let me ask the audience again to prepare yourselves to ask questions. We'd like to have an active dialogue. But before we do, our last speaker is the Seoul purely government representative on the panel, Laszlo Deák, who is the International Outreach Coordinator for Cyber Issues at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Hungary. Laszlo.
Thank you, Jen. And with your kind permission, I would like to be selfish at the beginning and thank our Korean hosts, not just for the gracious hospitality and this magnificent event, but also for the chance for the former hosts to be part of the preparatory process, which was very much appreciated. Thank you. I would like to start with a very simple proposition. From the Hungarian government's perspective, we do not see the widespread use of technologies as intrinsically good and as an end in and of itself. Therefore, we don't think that every issue that is being raised related to cyberspace needs a technological answer or a solution. Actually, we came here to Seoul to push our narrative forward. It's a global narrative now in Seoul, and one of the cornerstones of this narrative is that we are promoting a multi-stakeholder model for the use, maintenance, and development of cyberspace. Therefore, this chance for us here to try to identify the respective roles, competences, and responsibilities of various stakeholders is very much appreciated. Actually, I was earlier looking at the longer version of the speech that me and my team prepared for my foreign minister, and I wanted to see what actually was left in the speech that was eventually orally delivered. And I find three major things that I would like to enlist again for you. And all three of them are actually related to that pre-workshop that we organized on the side of the Budapest Africa Forum in June of this year. First, what we found is that without opportunity, there is precious little need for us to worry about security. But conversely, actually, if we want to harness the full benefits of opportunities in cyberspace, then of course, paying proper attention to security issues is indispensable. A second issue that we came away from the Africa Forum is that we want to define access, or we are proposing to define access, I'm sorry, at least in terms of three variables. One is, of course, the technological dimension. The second issue is affordability. But the third issue is local language development and local language content. Because again, and we could talk about it in a more interactive manner, what is the use of security information in times of natural or whatever emergencies if you don't have access to that information in your own language? So again, I think, and thank you for allowing us to define cybersecurity in a very broad manner, but we think that all these issues could be relevant in our discussions. And last but not least, we also came away from the Africa Forum with the issue of trust. And again, we want to look at it both from the opportunity and the security perspective. Because, think of a situation that you're going to a website because you want to order a ticket, and that website would block you out because of authentication or password issues. Conversely, how would it raise your level of comfort if you went on a government website to fill out a questionnaire and got timed out over and over again, and you had to start it again? So sometimes, and I thank you for your proposition, is that again, instead of thinking of the technological solutions or new technological solutions, maybe we should look at already what we have. Maybe there are much more simpler and already available solutions to our problems. And sometimes we really need to have to ask the question, is there really a benefit in adding an additional layer of security? is there really a benefit in adding another password to your official or whatever accounts? So again, that's why I'm very much appreciative of this discussion that we might be having here, because again, the respective roles and responsibilities of the multi-stakeholder model participants need to be discussed, and that's one of the major themes of this conference.
Thank you. Thank you, Laszlo. Now it's your turn. The audience, we're opening this up. If people have questions, and while you're mobilizing yourselves, I'll tell you that I represent a group called the Council on Cybersecurity, which is an independent international group of experts who are committed to a very simple mission. La bonne pratique sera la norme, making best practice common practice, whether it's technology, manpower, or policy. And a lot is known about best practice and things that we can be doing right now at no or low cost. We'll have tools available to those who join us, join our organization, so that you can do common sense assessments against the top 4 of the critical security controls, and I invite you to our website. But let me ask the audience for any questions that they might have. Although I know these presentations were so tightly woven, there may be no questions. Anyone? Yes, sir, in the white shirt. You may have to stand. It's a little difficult. It may be easy to see us. It's not quite as easy to see you. Please state your name.
Hello, James Pearson from Reuters with a quick question for Mr. Suffolk, who back in June wrote on his blog that we've not yet to see the global ramifications of PRISM. But with the more recent revelations, I just wondered if you had any comment on what these ramifications are, what they might be, and what else we can expect to see.
Thank you. I think what we've, and I touched on this in my speech a few moments ago, have really brought to the fore in terms of 2013 about the way the world is fundamentally intertwined from technology. But also our data is fundamentally intertwined, and we do have a challenge in terms of balancing the need for national security, and there is a need for national security, and balancing the need for personal data and personal privacy. And I think some of the ramifications on this is to, as I've discussed earlier, begin to be clear in terms of how we do both successfully. How do enterprises and governments and citizens work in that mixed mode kind of world? And whilst I can only, estimate at this time, I think there will be a clarification of laws and norms and standards. I think there will be a greater level of transparency in the industry and technology vendors in terms of their policies and procedures. And I think, as we've run a theme completely throughout this panel, a greater understanding of all parties, whether you're an individual using technology or you're an enterprise using technology, what your roles and responsibilities are to get that balance right.
Thanks, John. We have a couple of questions from Twitterverse, and let me invite Kiju to answer one, which is, what is the main problem of cybersecurity in the Republic of Korea?
Well, as you know, in Korea, most people are using wireless and wireline internet. Recently, the penetration of mobile services heavily increased. I think that is our biggest problem. In the past, Korean government focused on building broadband infrastructure, and we targeted on the usage of people, and that is why we have some weak points in our networks and information systems. But recently, Korean government and Korean private companies, even individual, are more awareness about cyber threats or attacks, and then these days, Korean people are trying to prepare more for this kind of cyber attacks or spam email and financial fraud instance.
Thank you. Let me ask our two representatives from regional who emphasized regional approaches, Neil and Yuri, you to ask, why aren't governments prioritizing protections? Why are they prioritizing threats? Why aren't they prioritizing the steps that each of us should be taking to prevent most of the threats that we all have agreed on this panel, and I've been seeing bobbing heads in the audience? But it doesn't seem like it would take a lot for them to do that. Neil?
Well, I think that's an excellent question, and I think that generally the kind of dogma out there is that you deal with national threats, and that I think fora like these are exactly the ones where we can say that we can do simple things, but we also need to do the bigger things. So. Frankly, I just don't have a good answer for the question, so you've put me on the spot, so.
I think we start seeing, like, people start realizing that you cannot protect 100%. There's always a risk there. So it's moving gradually from a defense, protection, security mindset to a little more risk reduction and risk management approach. I really think that moving away from the security mindset to more treating the cybersecurity challenges as improving the global environment type of approach is really developing more clearly the responsibility to all the layers of stakeholders. So, for example, the reason why you have to do the cyber 101 hygiene to protect you is not really only protecting yourself from the threat, but to avoiding you to be a part of the attack infrastructure, because you're being compromised and being a part of the botnet or other cases. So I remember some international meetings, I heard some experts saying that we have to start having this mindset, like in the public healthcare, one-on-one, you wash your hands, and that's not only to protect you from viruses, but it's avoid that you are spreading the viruses to the others. So I think we all have to start having that mindset, and that would, again, help developing the all more responsibility mindset to the players.
Thanks for that, Neil. And in fact, part of the reason you encouraged me to ask the question is because the OAS made a considerable investment in raising awareness. And you have focused, as all of our speakers have mentioned, on the upper end of the threat spectrum. And you are entirely in a position of authority to tell us exactly what Yuri is talking about. What's the equivalent of brushing our teeth and flossing and visiting the dentist that will reduce our potential for cavities in the case of oral hygiene? The 4 critical controls that will reduce our vulnerability in cyber threats. I think, Sherry, you wanted to come in on this.
I did. You asked, why is it so difficult for governments to prioritize the threat? And I think that part of the reason is that how do you prioritize so many different things that are coming at you all the time? It's very difficult to make a distinction between a very sophisticated advanced persistent threat attack versus a nuisance DDoS attack that might be flooding your network infrastructure. And so that, I think, is something that we in industry, frankly, have to do a better job of, is communicating. What do we mean by different types of attacks? How do you protect yourself? You need to have basic controls in place, obviously. But if you don't, how do you decipher what's important to address versus what is not? And I think the environment is so ripe with so much information on a daily basis. It's difficult, frankly, for governments, businesses, and citizens to decipher and cut through all of that.
So, John, I'm going to want you to come in on this, but I think that's precisely the point, and we have a question related to this from the Twitterverse, which is how does the panel prioritize between national threats and threats to individuals? Yuri spoke about undertaking the basic hygiene. Washing your hands prevents an innumerable number of diseases potentially and reduces your vulnerability to those diseases, yet it's the simple act of washing your hands. John, maybe you can address this question.
I think human nature plays an important role in the way we make decisions in business. If you're going to your board and saying, look, board, I think we need to invest in a new sprinkler system, a new fire detection, because we might have a problem going forward. That is not a very compelling business case, might have a problem. And boards are more interested in talking and really understanding the operational need of today and the current year, and some may look at 3 and 5 years. So threat is an easy thing to get your head around. We're being attacked all the time. We may not be able to prioritize what the threat is because we may not have that sophistication. I need defense-based technology. So what we end up doing is what we like doing, which is fighting fires. If you then have to go to the board and say, I want to really strategically look forward. I want to think about not only the threats of today, but the threats we're going to get in 5 and 10 years' time, which I can't articulate very well to you. And it's all deeply technical because we don't know how the world will shift. Hands up if you think you're going to get a lot of investment for really doing the hygiene, taking more of a strategic view. It's a very hard sell in times of economic pressure. So I think there's an issue here in terms of where human behavior kicks in, which is I can get my head around a threat, may not understand it, but I can get a head around, I will invest. I can't get my head around 5th generation technology because I don't really understand what was 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. And therefore, I'm unlikely to invest unless you have a very, very sophisticated board who are close to this as an issue. And I think if you look at all of the public sector campaigns that many governments have run around the world, do not drink and drive. People still drink and drive. Look both ways before you cross the road. People still get run over. And the list goes on and on and on. And I think with hygiene of cybersecurity, this is about changing behavior. And changing behavior is a long-term need, but you have to have a stimulus. And I think it's where governments can come in and regulators can come in because they can provide the stimulus until we kind of like get this, I actually can't use my phone when I'm driving, I can't drink and drive. I think there has to be a stimulus in terms of driving that basic hygiene move forward on security.
Let me turn to the audience again. A woman right here on the aisle. Please identify yourself.
Thank you. Mimi Kim from Pre-University of Brussels. You mentioned, for example, prioritizing hygiene. You also mentioned, for example, prioritizing, understanding human behavior. But I think that there are principles that we cannot prioritize. There are fundamental human rights. Wherever you are, fundamental human rights, I think, are very basic for cybersecurity. And I think EU has put forward a very good strategy, for example, and directions in that regard. So how do you, for example, balance the cybersecurity issue with fundamentally actually different value rising, for example, in governments or organizations in the world? I think that is one of the biggest challenges we have in directing cybersecurity policies in the future. Thank you.
Laszlo, let me toss this one your way. Do you agree? Is it a problem trying to reconcile rights with security?
What answer? Can you help me on?
Yeah, so the question essentially is one that I think has been percolating around the cybersecurity conversation, which in part may contribute to the difficulty that we all have in trying to define cybersecurity. How do we create a cybersecurity regime, let's say of the basic hygiene, whitelisting software, limiting administrative permissions, real-time patching. Those kinds of things are relatively straightforward and simple technical tasks that go a very long way to protecting people. Is there any inconsistency with taking steps like that and privacy? And how does privacy or individual rights, civil rights and civil liberties factor into decisions that governments make as they're thinking through the new problems being presented with cybersecurity?
Thank you for that. I think in an ideal world, there shouldn't be any kind of contradiction between exercising and enjoying our human rights and at the same time, you know, not posing security threats. So I'm not sure if it's appropriate, but maybe before the reception I can bring up the issue of alcoholism. You know, I think it's a basic human right to be a drunk, but at the same time, I'm not sure that the social benefits of being a drunk are always very compelling from that perspective. So, sorry for pushing it into that direction, but I think there needs to be, you know, a balance, and I think governments, together with all other relevant stakeholders, must continuously work on finding that proper balance. You know, it's kind of like optimal tax. You know, what is the optimal tax? You know, this year, but so maybe, you know, we always need to evaluate the environment and be flexible in terms of trying to find a balance, and not a silver bullet, as you just said. Thank you.
We have time for one more question. Over here on the aisle. Jim, is that you? Oh. Can you just identify yourself for the microphone, please?
I'm Jim Lewis. I work at a place called CSIS. I have a question for the whole panel, but I'll start with you, Jane. We've heard all this discussion. It's been really valuable. But if you had to say the one top thing on your list of things to do to improve cybersecurity, what would it be? And you can do this quickly. Jane, maybe you could go into a little more detail on the critical controls when you answer this, but just down the road, if you had to do one thing, and I hope you all have different things, what would it be?
Well, we'll end the panel with this, Jim. It's a good question. Let me start down at the far end, and Kiju, ask you to begin, and then we'll work our way towards me, and I'll close.
As I emphasized in my presentation, I would like to point out the importance of a knowledge sharing program, knowledge and information sharing program between countries. And I think this kind of programs should be supported by government or international organizations on the basis of bilateral level and regional level, sometimes worldwide level. I think that is the most important thing.
John, one thing.
Thank you, James. My one thing would be I would get the G20 that they would all mandate that any vendor selling to government must conform to a set of agreed standards, otherwise they get no public sector business.
Sherry.
I could say install the latest security software, but I won't. It's too obvious. What I will say, though, is ensure that you've identified what your most critical assets and critical data is and protect it accordingly.
Yuri.
It's hard. I can't pick one, really.
What do you do personally every day to ensure cybersecurity?
I would probably encourage to raise awareness of the risks and do basic cyber hygiene 101.
Neil?
I would advise our member states to know where to go to get help. That's one of the things we really promote is networking. Know your neighbors, so that when you have a problem, you know who to go to get help.
Laszlo?
Thank you. My mind, from a government perspective, maintenance and protection of critical infrastructure, I don't think that can be outsourced. That is somehow a government function eventually.
Well, it won't be a surprise to this audience. My one thing would be to implement the top 4 or 5 of the 20 critical controls immediately. Why do I say that? We say it because we know from the technologists and the experts that those are the things, those 4 simple steps that happen at low or no cost. You can do them right now. Most people are not doing them, but you could do them right now. What are they? Jim asked me to elaborate. Whitelist your software, limit administrative permissions, and real-time patching of your systems and your applications. There's some that add also understand the configuration, essentially whitelist your hardware as well. Is it doable? It's doable. The Australians ran a test recently. 1,700 machines, 1,200 machines against 1,700 pieces of the most common malware with a 100% prevention rate. 100% of those 1,700 pieces of malware were prevented with these 4 measures. So if I would recommend one thing, Jim, it would be to implement the top 4 of the 20 critical controls, or the top 5. There are, as one of us mentioned, several lists, but the top 4 or 5 are the same on every list. On behalf of all of you and on behalf of my panelists, let me thank you and those who are participating by Twitter and online. Thank you for participating. Thank you again to the Republic of Korea for hosting us here, and thank you for a most excellent conversation and conference.
Thank you, President Jane Liu, to all speakers and discussants. And ladies and gentlemen, this marks the end of today's program. We would like to extend our sincere thanks to you for taking the time to be part of today's occasion. Panel discussions and plenary sessions will continue tomorrow. For more details on tomorrow's programs, please refer to the program book. Also, please note that the official dinner for invited guests hosted by Minister of Foreign Affairs of Republic of Korea, will be held at Harmony Ballroom at Coex Intercontinental Hotel at 19:30. For those who are invited to the official dinner, please proceed to Coex Intercontinental Hotel. I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Thank you and good night.